Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, for the afternoon lecture. I have the honor to introduce the speech of Richard Whalley. Whalley, okay, right. He's going to talk about his composition. Richard is a composer and pianist living in Manchester, where he's a senior lecturer in composition at the University of Manchester. His compositions take their inspiration from the passage of time and memory, analogies with visual art and sculpture, from geopolitics, such as fallout from Brexit, for instance, or the climate emergency, and increasingly from nature. Physical processes which may be huge, like the glaciation and erosion of mountains, or microscopic, like looking in detail to the structure of plants. As a pianist, he is regularly performing classical and contemporary music as a soloist and ensemble player, and has given numerous premieres. Please welcome with me.
So, well, thank you everybody. Thank you for the welcome. And it's my second time here. I love this symposium. It's just great, the conversations we're having and just all the information and everybody's ideas. It's wonderful. So it's a real privilege to be here. So I'm going to talk about this piece for two violins called Unwanted Wildness. So microtones and weeds. They're both small. Well, they start off small anyway, so there's a connection there. So just really quick introduction. I know some of you know my work anyway, but just in terms of, so some of the works that I've done involving microtones are listed here. I suppose my main motivation behind microtones is because I'm a pianist, and pianos have their limitations. And so, in a way, this sort of frustration with the 12 equal divisions of the octave, it's been a really powerful motivation for what else can you do. I suppose I'm also quite a bad viola player, and I remember when I was, just learning, when I was younger, I couldn't play in tune anyway, but I was also enjoying some of the different tunings. So there's a sort of desire to explore through that, and I suppose first of all maybe I explored through quarter tones, which is the sort of logical starting place, and more recently I suppose two things to pick out on here is I wrote for Stefan, the trumpeter, who has a 19-tone trumpet. That happened during the pandemic, and it was just the right thing to happen at the right time, because I'm curious about this anyway, and actually 19 tones it's fascinating. And I've also used glissandi quite a lot, and because it's just, I guess I like them, and I'm sort of very interested in the possibilities and the possibility of suggesting that things can be infinite. Like music, it's really interesting when you don't know the limitations of what can happen. And when you feel, okay, this piece isn't going to go beyond that, then sometimes I might get a bit bored. So it's, but the possibility of everything, but not like literally everything, so you get confused. That kind of space, it's quite an interesting space. I put a picture of a lumitone here, because last time I said I'd really love to have a lumitone. And I know those of you who live who work in universities, usually universities are very financially strapped, and the universities in the UK definitely financially strapped at the moment, but somehow, maybe just the right time, the head of department I'm working in, there was a little bit of money left over in the budget, so they bought a lumitone. So I've got access to a lumitone, and I'm trying to learn how to play it, and I have to know how to play it because there's a project which I'm doing with Stephen Ulf-Diether and a singer and electroacoustic composer. Great timing. I'm sorry about that. I didn't even realise that could happen. I thought I had it on silent. Okay. Lumitone. Yeah, so the singer and electroacoustic composer Sarah Carl, Stephen Ulf-Diether and myself, we're working on this project, which is going to be, it's like a sort of 45-minute expansion beyond Lud's Church with some improvisation in it, some recordings, and this other piece where I'm setting some text for this. So it's great, I'm learning to play the lunar tone through that. I consider myself fairly amateur on it, but it's really interesting to do. Johannes the other day when he said there's no such thing as microtonal music, of course that got me thinking, but let's not go there right now. But I mean, yeah, I totally get that. But I think just a general interest in the possibilities of pitch beyond, what's possible. That's great, and I would love to. I'd love to go further. I'd love to do more with. I haven't really got into just intonation yet, but I can see that it's the power of that. The other thing is, just to talk about plants and nature and stuff, just focusing on that side of it. I'm not going to read all these pieces out, but I just found myself increasingly going towards nature. When Jonathan this morning, he was saying about the growth of things with fractals and how plants are like that, and you look at them through a microscope, and it's just really interesting, the patterns, or you look at the big patterns. That, I find it intellectually satisfying, but I also find that, I don't know, I just love nature. I mean, I have a desire to hug trees and stroke moss, and, I can't just be passive. I love it if I find that if I haven't been there for a while, I'm frustrated, and if I'm there, especially if there's no one else around, I'm just very kind of deeply looking at everything and getting inspiration from it. And yeah, on that subject, okay, this pops up. So I'm going to talk about this piece, Unwanted Wildness, and I thought, look, let's just get the sound world of the piece. I don't know why it's just disappeared like that, but I'll just get the sound world into it a little bit, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit away from microtones, and then I'm going to come back to them. So I'm not sure why that has disappeared, but maybe if I go in this route. No. Alright. Or I go in. Okay, let me just play you the beginning through this. Maybe this will work. Sorry, I missed the first pizzicato, but you can still hear the sound well. So that's just a little taster of the beginning of the piece I'm going to write. You can hear that there's very, very narrow intervals because it's the beginning of things. It's also quite engaged with the timbre of string instruments, because this is the thing, we have this sort of fascination with purity of tuning, but colour and timbre, they're part of it, but they're also sort of working against it in some ways, and or subverting it, or just giving you a lot of extra information beyond just what's normal. And that, I find that space really interesting. Right, so let's go back to right, so sorry, this next bit isn't about microtones at all, but just about weeds and plants. There's at University of Manchester where I work, there's quite a lot of people, none of these people are in the music department. Anke Bernal, Aurora Fredrickson, Ingrid Hansen. They were doing a project on weeds a few years ago, and I thought, actually, that kind of resonates with me, because these, we see weeds everywhere, and they're amazing things, weeds, you know, they can be kind of beautiful, but even when they're not beautiful, they're still like miracles. They're so well adjusted to the place where we live when we see them, and I think we probably miss weeds if they weren't growing, and certainly, you know, like neglected spaces, they take on a kind of beauty because of the presence of weeds. So by the time I actually wrote this piece about weeds, they've moved on. Now now they're dealing with moss, and I'm planning a moss piece, but that's a separate matter. But so I mean, there's a project. So there's actually all these people with this knowledge who are doing creative things, and it's really nice to be part of that. There's also a composer, improviser called Henry McPherson who does graphics scores, and he's very much part of that as well. So yeah, this is a wonderful book. But just what I've got here, I mean, the thing about weeds is they grow anywhere. So brambles, we all know brambles. I see brambles grow where pretty much everybody lives. I don't know if anybody here does gardening. I mean, it was pulling brambles out because they're amazing how they just grow and they kind of link, and I just think, you know, I kind of pull them out because it's really annoying, but it's also kind of amazing. And then they have these nice flowers and they give you these fruits, and I always think it's funny that you have blackberry bushes all over the place and nobody picks them apart from a few eccentric weirdos who like nature. Like most people, they'll spend £2 or £3 for a little punnet of blackberries at the supermarket, but they're just growing. And so it's great. But you know, the other side of it, of course, you have invasive species. I don't know whether this grows in Salzburg. This grows in Manchester. It's Himalayan balsam. It grows so well. It's quite big. The stems are quite thick, and it sort of crowds out all of the native plant life. And
is it a healing plant because it says balsam?
I'm not sure.
Maybe it's quite useful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could be, but I think it's generally people try to pull it out as much as possible because once it takes hold, you can see how it's on both sides of the river and it's really big up there, and it's not great for all the insect life, plants that should be there, that would be, you know, where the insects are sort of getting the nectar and so on. They're not there because of these, and you know, I mean, it's a big problem. Invasive species, they grow everywhere. So anyway, there's a lot. It's an interesting subject. It resonates with me quite a lot. So when I was writing this piece, so this is a map of Manchester, and it occurred to me I love to go on little bike rides, and actually during the pandemic I realised that it was wonderful to cycle on the canal towpath. So Manchester, it's an industrial city, and I guess in the 1800s, you know, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when a canal infrastructure was built everywhere, because canals are flat, you have water, and they have towpaths which you can ride along. So the Ashton Canal, you can see it if you follow. Oh, hang on, it's this one here. You can see it. That's sort of going out to the east of Manchester. Those of you who like football will see the Etihad Stadium just there on the Ashton Canal, and anybody who supports Manchester United will probably be upset that I didn't go to the Bridgewater Canal, which is to the west of Manchester, where the Manchester United Stadium is. But anyway, I just sort of had a feeling canal towpath, there's going to be lots of interesting plants there. So this is what it looks like. It's just a few random pictures of it at different times of the year. But this is kind of quintessential old industry. A lot of these buildings, they're not really being used. You go more into the city centre, they're being turned into really, really nice, expensive apartments that you can't afford to live in. There's areas of industry as well. Those round gas cylinders, they've unfortunately been taken down. I don't know why they've taken things down, it's just, they're great. But you can see various plants growing by the side of it. And indeed, I sort of went through this process sort of between April and June. Every now and then I'd go there and just have a look at the plants that were growing, take photos of them using this app here, picture this. And I identified about 60 different types of plants. I don't know if I identified them all correctly, but but in a way it doesn't matter the accuracy, it's the principle. But that's a drop in the ocean. I'm sure there's much more than that. There's incredible diversity, and in April you just see these little green leaves, and you don't know what they're going to grow into, and everything looks a bit the same, and it's so. You can see here, I start off with just 2 or 3 things, and then I go a bit later, and actually there's all these different things growing in the same place. It's fascinating. And so I was doing that, and I was starting to think, what kind of timbres on string instruments would work with the different plants. The idea that the plants would have sort of something recognisable, and so I would find something recognisable with the music. So I'm thinking, well, how do I write something that makes sense, that's interesting musically, engaging out of all of this information? I'm always telling students, more is less. Don't have so many ideas, just go further, deeper with the ideas you've got. So I've got 60 different types of plants. How do you organise all of this so it doesn't feel like there's too many ideas? So I'll show you partly this. During this project, I got to really love ribwort plantains. You see them everywhere. I've not seen any in Salzburg yet, but they're like little. They're not. They have these tiny flowers. Ribwort plantain there, and they're very sort of perky, if you like. They've got this sort of texture. They stick up. They're quite lively. They're not pretty, but they're just everywhere. And so I thought pizzicate. They're represented by pizzicate. You can see on this page, I'm just trying to sketch a few things. I'm just sort of finding little musical ideas and associating them with plants. The idea being that then you have different parts of the canal which have different plants, so I can have a different pot of ideas in there. So that's kind of the concept. Now, in terms of organising it, this is something I do because I find it a really interesting way of finding a structure. I've done it with a number of pieces. So you can see the map. I don't know if you can see, but I marked on wherever there's a bridge over the canal, and wherever there's a lock, a lock where it goes to another level. And so one is in one colour, one is in another colour, and then the part of the canal I was studying, I just sort of draw a line. I put where these things are, and I'm thinking, can I make a structure out of this? I like that challenge because it makes you feel, okay, where is a high point? Where am I aiming for? It gives you, it's not golden section. You get quite interesting proportions to try and make work, and I suppose that's just something I find an interesting thing to do. So part of it is, who was it was talking about? William was talking about intuition this morning. I am actually very intuitive when I'm working. I use quite a lot of improvisation. I'm trying to use improvisation within a structure that is coherent and makes sense and that's challenging me to do something that's not just sort of general and not so interesting. So I'm planning the structure quite detailed, but then I've got more freedom on the surface. So you can see a sort of timeline of canals and locks and trying to sort of think, okay, what can go at a certain point, what plants can I have, what shapes can I have. You probably can't read what's circled in red, but what tuning systems can I have at certain points? The whole piece is expanding because if you think about when you go from the early spring into the summer, everything expands during that point. So the music has to expand. And you can see how pitch can do that. So you heard the beginning where it's just this sort of open E. And later on, everything kind of moves outwards. And it's possible to control that expansion, partly by having different divisions of pitch at certain times, and also by thinking about register in a strategic way. So originally I thought, can I write a whole piece within a perfect fifth, just from E to A? And then I didn't. I failed. But that sort of idea is still really important to what's going on. What's the other thing to say here? Yeah, I decided to have some music that's more free-flowing with these different types of plants, but these sort of interrupted by these sections, which I've just called here B flat to E rising, because that's literally what happens. I was thinking I expand from E down to B flat, and then I move back to E. So those sections are more like it's contrasting. You have sort of I'll show you in a minute, but you have these sort of chords that move with different pitch divisions, and it gives a sort of sense of I've reached this point. So there's this contrasting music, and then that kind of becomes integrated as well. Let me just, okay, so I suppose on this page I've got the beginning that you heard from E. So then what's the narrowest intervals you can do on the violin? So the thing is, the fingers are kind of fat. So that came up with, who was talking about Ben Johnston? But there's a sort of lack of precision. And also, what's the minimum space where you can put two fingers down next to each other? Because if you can put two fingers down next to each other, then you've got quite a lot of freedom with the way you put notes together. But if the intervals are too small, then you're just sliding around on one finger, and you don't have the same accuracy. Which also meant that I figured out that a third tone was about the minimum on a violin, that you can sort of do that with some degree of accuracy. So anything less than the third tone, I don't do too much sort of finger work, which also gives rise to this idea of crossing the strings, the unison, because of course you can get much smaller intervals and you can control it more precisely with a note against an open string, and you can also hear it. And I say sixth tones are the smallest, but you can also have glissando to sixth tones, so I suppose you can have even smaller intervals within that. So what about, I suppose, the different divisions, they have different characters, don't they? I was interested in that. To my ear, semitones, it's very familiar. Of course, it's easy. If you're doing something where there's a lot of movement and it's very difficult, it's much easier with familiar intervals. And quarter tones are the natural division of that. And quarter tones, they do have this very particular quality, don't they? I mean, to me, they're very dissonant, and I suppose quarter tones, they retain a lot of the problems of semitones, or the limitations of them. But they are sort of familiar and they're easier to hit. I find, I suppose, third tones, sixth tones, if you like, softer, more expressive, and I'm sure just intonation people, I mean, they're more closer to just intonation intervals, or the third tones, are they? I don't know whether that's true or not. It's a feeling that they're less dissonant, or I may be wrong. I haven't really gone into just intonation. I mean, I'm interested in it. I think partly the music's a little bit too virtuosic, and I was fascinated yesterday when Manfred was talking about how he managed to do it within a context which was quite virtuosic, by just having the way that the kind of scales that are actually not that difficult to finger. It's just a slightly different positioning. But yeah, I mean, I think fifth tones, the other thing, third tones are kind of close to 18 and 19. So there's a feeling of the 19 division scale with third tones. I didn't think fifth tones was practical, but I mean, to get the feeling of 31, but maybe it is if the music's slower. Anyway, so that's, you see the melody there in third tones. I have quite a lot of these sort of melodies. I kind of improvised the melody a little bit and played around with it. It's not particularly systematic, but it's just creating a shape. And then I just feel like quarter tones have got a really different character, so you shift between quarter tones and thirds, and it's quite characterizing. What else to say? This is the first B flat to E section. You see the character of the music is really very different there. The rhythm is much simpler. The texture is more unified. It's less sort of organic, like the bits before. When you see the chaos of nature, you see it around Salzburg now. Sometimes where you see like a meadow and there's wildflowers, or you see bushes, and you look at it closely. It's so complex, but because of that complexity, I felt there was a need to have simplicity in places, or relatively simplicity. And if you look at the interval, I don't know, can you see the intervals? So I've got sixth tones at the very beginning, and then as you go through this passage, the intervals gradually widen, and I'm using arrows for sixth tones, so an arrow is a sixth tone adjustment on a semitone, and for quarter tones I'm using standard quarter tone notation. That just seems the sort of simplest way, and I guess as long as you're not used to thinking of arrows as eighth tones, it probably works quite well. So, yeah, those are, remember, these are quarter tones here. I'm sure there's third tones, because the idea is through here. This is three-quarter tones. So, yeah, the intervals through that section gradually get wider, so there's a sense of expansion in various ways. I've also got, just as a sort of destination, I've got the end of the music here where the register is much wider and the ideas are mixed together. So you can see this B flat to E idea kind of mixed with other things, because nature does that. Everything spreads out and mixes itself up. So how long have I got? Have I got time to play about
20 minutes we have got. You've got
20 minutes total?
altogether.
Oh wow, okay. So,
well, but if you want to leave some time for questions.
Yeah, sure. I was going to play about 5 minutes, like the last 5 minutes.
Yes.
Because that gives you a bit of a bigger context of how the music is working. I think I've told you pretty much what I was going to say about the principles of the way of thinking. So maybe if I just play that and then we can have questions, is that okay?
Thank you.
So I wrote it for, yeah, that didn't work either. I don't know why it didn't work. I embedded the PowerPoint. But so this is Mark and Gilles from the Quatuor d'Arnel. And one of the wonderful things about this, arguably the best thing in Manchester, even though they live in Manchester, but we have the d'Arnel Quartet as a sort of, they come and visit us regularly through the year. And they're just the most amazing musicians. They're such a pleasure to work with. They've been with us for about 20 years, and during that time they've become really famous, and they're sort of flying all over the world, and they're getting more and more in demand. And because as they get more and more in demand, they're being asked to play Beethoven and Shostakovich and Schubert, and they do a lot of Weinberg, sort of Russian music. And and they don't get to do as much contemporary music as they would ideally like to, but they're wonderful to work with. So they did this, the performance they did, I can show you the score follower thing. It's not totally accurate. I mean, they really got the feeling of it as a performance. It really felt, it was great. They totally sort of understood what they're going for. I bet if they'd had another couple of hours, they could have got it sort of 90% accurate. So you'll notice it's not completely accurate, so I didn't want to put that online, but don't judge their accuracy by this, because they're incredible. But they just had this intuitive sense of how to play the music, which was the important thing. So let me go back to this, and I'll go to about, hang on, sorry, I can't. First time we've got the 9 minutes to this wide register. It's the first time we've heard these registers.
May I just first some comments? We are talking these days in general about intuition all the time about intuition. Jonathan Doe was talking about metaphors as well.
Yeah.
And then he's not here. He left for the airport, but he was saying that microtonality. I mean, compared to the guitar on the piece, that on the strings they don't really work. Mm-hmm. Because of this scordatura. And then have you tried to use scordatura with the string players? I mean, you didn't use...
No, I didn't use scordatura.
Yes.
No.
But maybe some other pieces, do you have any experiences that you can compare this one to others?
I've not used scordatura. I suppose I'm slightly apprehensive about it because players tend to not like it.
Yes.
That's one thing. And it's also, if I now this piece is quite complex and it's really, really difficult to play. And it's, I knew that with these guys they could do it. But I suppose one of the other things I'm battling with is, do I have to make my music so difficult? Can I realise my vision in a way that's maybe accessible to not just the sort of top elite, most amazing performers, but more performers? And and if you do something that's very difficult, I always feel, well, it's fine if it's justified. It totally makes sense. There's music that has to be that way, but it's something I feel a little bit trying to figure out ways of doing things maybe less. So no, I think if I wanted to use scordatura, then I'd probably write something that's slower, more sustained, and then. Where there's time, because you have to think about the implications of that as well. So potentially.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So of course, depending on the textures you're working with as a composer.
Yeah, indeed. But I'm using the open strings very much. That you heard the open string pictures quite prominently in what you heard. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
How do you decide what kind of microtones you're employing at the particular motif, or I can understand somehow that you mentioned that it's rather intuitive.
Yeah.
But is it completely intuitive? Should I imagine you sitting in front of the paper with your pencil and okay, this feels like 6 tones would work the best, or is there also something behind, you know what I mean probably?
Yeah. So when I was doing the planning stage, you saw, I don't know, maybe it was too small, but to see the details. But I was thinking, okay, this is a quarter tone passage, this is a third tone passage. So I was trying to sort of organise where I'd have different intervals of different characters. I suppose what I played you at the end, you heard that less because towards the end everything is more mixed up together, so there's less distinction between the ideas. So as the parts get bigger, they all overlap and you can't even tell what stem belongs to what, whereas at the beginning you see a little patch of things.
Is there any correlation between particular microtones and plants?
Yeah, I think there was. I'm not sure, I can't quite remember, but I think there was. There's that melody that comes every now and then that I worked out on third tones. It could be played on other intervals, but I worked it out with third tones because I was thinking there's something quite lyrical about third tones, although they're slightly hard to play melodically because it's a bit unfamiliar for the players. And I did quite a lot of just playing, playing on the viola and recording myself for the ideas and then trying to make something that actually sort of sounded consistent. I get better ideas. I have to react to something. I'm not very good at just sitting there and thinking of something. I get moving as well. You're saying you said you move, but walking. So many ideas you get, but then I find also playing or moving is much better. Everything just breathes then. If I'm just sitting looking at things, everything's just a bit not really got much life in it. So it's very intuitive, but there's a sense also that structurally, I think if the structure is sort of worked out to gradually open out, then there is a sort of logic. And in the B flat to E bit that you had at the beginning of that, there was I think I quite systematically went 6th, quarter, third, half, then sort of multiples of those. So, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Some more questions? Ah, yeah.
So just I want to extend your question. It's interesting. You use 16 plants.
Sorry?
16 plants.
There were about 60 plants.
About
yeah.
60.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's interesting how you exposed it in a composition with
Yeah.
microtones.
Yeah.
You pick something different for each plant, or
I wasn't systematic. I started off being more systematic, and then I became less so as I got more into the piece. But I sketched. I made a list of the plants, and I thought, what kind of sound, what kind of character. So maybe this would be a scratch tone, this would be pizzicato, this would be ricochet, this would be a sort of a little fragment of something, things like that. And I suppose, the big, more voluminous plants, they would be more lyrical. And then there's a point at which, okay, I've sort of done that enough, but let's just make the music work. So if you try to sort of follow, you won't see 60 different ideas in it. It was more, that's the idea behind the piece, and that's what you hear more earlier on when you can separate things out. But there's also, there's musical logic, which has a natural flow to it, and then there's a sort of systematic logic. I feel like if I've been through this systematic thing, there's something holding it together, so then there's room to be freer. And I really like freedoms. Not in this piece, but in some pieces, I'm trying to go more towards indeterminacy in various ways, because it's also, I'm fascinated by what musicians can add. But they can't really add very much. There's not enough room in that kind of piece. But so I think this is the direction I'm going more in, and into some other pieces. Yeah.
Yes.
So I felt that the music was very using a duo like that, and the extended techniques are very suited to weeds.
Yeah.
Because most weeds have to defend themselves in some way, so they're a bit prickly. Could you just reflect a little bit on what you might be doing differently with a moss piece? Because moss is soft and pillowy and lovely. Would you think of a change of instrumentation? I know that's off the cuff, but
I'm thinking, that's a really interesting question, because that is exactly what I'm thinking about at the moment, how to do that. Yes, the other thing, you kind of heard the climactic part of that piece. Like, a lot of that piece is quite quiet and very small, more like the beginning. And I'm aware that you might feel it's quite restless and passionate and everything because of what happened later. The moss piece in my mind, I'd really like to do a piece that is really quiet. I find it hard not to do a climax somewhere. It's just my training, it's just my background, it's just having grown up on classical music. It's the idea that music builds to somewhere, and that's so much sort of integrated. It'd be quite interesting to not do that with moss, but there's also, you think about the metaphors. You think there's a little the reproductive system of moss is really interesting, because you get all the sort of pillowy bits, but then you get these little sort of things that pop out with little sort of hooks on the end, like flowers, and so that could be out of a sort of small world. You can have a sort of upward interval that comes that you haven't really prepared before, and then out of these there's female plants and male ones, and I haven't totally got my head around this, but somehow spores come out and they're fertilized, and you get this little pointillism, and then they kind of land and then grow other things. What Jonathan says about fractals, I can't do that. I don't know. I can't write in his method, but he talked about nature. There was a point where he said something and it totally resonated with me about how nature comes from these smallest things which grow into these really complex patterns. So that's in my mind. But yes, you can also choose softer sounds. I'm thinking with this, maybe open instrumentation or different versions or different things that different instruments can contribute, so that whatever you have on the table, you can have slightly different way of looking at moss.
Okay.
May I still very shortly, did you consider any audio qualities of the plants for your decisions? How they sound, how you somehow...
No, I didn't. No, so
okay.
I don't know.
I was just curious. It's fine.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure, because they don't really do they make sounds? They probably do if you look at them. I don't know. It's an interesting question, actually. Yeah.
If you put a string
Yeah.
around it like I would.
Maybe you would find a way.
Well, I mean, there's the wind sound, of course. There's how they respond in the wind.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Songs, film, dance, and light music. Starting from tonal to diphony, to creatively explore connections between chromaticism and microtonal music as well as non-European tonal system, and since 2007 has brought micro-intervallic chamber music works and digitally produced recordings of microtonal music, especially the completely micro-intervallic Third Symphony, and microtonal sound files for Soyka's opera Linia, performed in concert in Birmingham in 2012. Microtonal interlude for the bilingual opera Leila, which had 6 performances in 2003 at Künstlerhaus Vienna. After studies with Friedrich Scherrer and Ottmar Sweetner, Soyka worked as a conductor of numerous first performances, for instance of composers expelled in 1938, as a musician teacher at grammar schools, as an assistant at the Music University, and as a lecturer at conservatories in Vienna. For students, his Mikrotöne, published by Universal Edition, are helpful. Welcome, Dieter Soyka.
Thank you, Petra, and thank you, Agustin, for this wonderful symposium and for inviting me to be a part of this. It's wonderful for me. I beg your pardon, I will read my lecture.
No, Stefan.
Okay.
You don't have to, but maybe.
Danke, ja. Chord accompaniment of microchromatic in 72 Edo. It must therefore be my first task to raise awareness of the important role that the imagination of sounds and sound movements has long played and indeed must always play in music making, told Hugo Riemann in 1914. 72 Edo means 70 tone steps per octave, all of which are equal in size within the logarithmic octave division in cent intervals. Alois Haber already preferred an equally tempered tone set as the basis of microtone frequency selection. 70 tone steps per octave seem like a lot compared to diatonic and 12 tone music. However, 144 Edo, twice as many tone steps, half as large, could offer a much more accurate approximation of just intonation. Nevertheless, 72 Edo is chosen here as a historical compromise as the starting point. This is because 72 interval sizes per octave are available on keyboards that exist today. And the notation in 72 Edo is easier to read than in 144. The following tone ratios are intended to be as purely tonal as possible. Hugo Riemann suggested that when actively nonverbal thinking in music structures, one should also imagine minimal pitch differences such as Pythagorean comma, etc. Alois Haber called for training in the ability to combine every microtone pitch with every other in musical thinking. Such skills, meanwhile, got a prerequisite for professional music making in the context of world music. Since every microinterval can also be accompanied by multiple voices, the question arises as to the degree of consonance of the respective chords, as well as of the unaccompanied microinterval itself. The following tables appear to represent chords, potentially simple synchronous frequency ratios, but not melodic sequences of tones or chord progressions. They are designated by chord letters and symbols. These accompanying chords do not constitute a rule for chord and chord progression theory, but rather represent one of the possible tonal paths. Benedikt Stegemann described the tonal path in Arnold Schönberg's compositions. Such a tonal path is, from today's microinterval perspective, related to Schönberg's intentions. Schönberg wrote, "According to my theory of the emancipation of dissonance, dissonances are only the more distant consonances in the overtone series. Partial tones combinations that are beyond the simplest prime numbers, such as 1, 2, 3, 5, and their multiples, e.g. 8 to 9 or 54 to 50, 60, 64, 80, 81, and so on, often stand in dissonant relationships, e.g. when two consonant fifths, such as 4 to 6 and 6 to 9, are layered on top of each other and produce the dissonant interval of the major second 8 to 9 or the ninth 4 to 9. Jens Rohwer noted in the 1970s, in addition to consonant unisonant harmonies, major and minor harmony, there are also dissonant, dissonant, and even trisonant and quadrisonant harmonies. Many of the chord combinations below later represent such dissonant sounding combinations of consonant intervals. The additional differences between the two neighboring whole tone sizes 8 to 9 and 9 to 10, for example, could not longer be realized on the 12-tone tempered logarithmic chromatic selection system 12-IDO. Such subtle pitch differences were reserved for instruments and voices that could make precise pitch distinctions audible to means of human pitch imagination. And some more distant consonances addressed by Schönberg also are found in ecmelic microinterval frequency ratios, such as 6 to 7 or 9 to 11 and so on, 11 and so on, which were historically excluded as dissonant and also as impure. Little pitch differences that could not be imagined and could not be made audible, for example by singing, then raised expectations of advances of instrument making, through which more complex frequency ratios, e.g. also more degrees of sonance between consonants and dissonance, could be made audible. Schönberg himself responded to the differences in pitch between the 12-tone equal temperament and on the one hand, and the rational interval proportions in the natural tone series on the other, as follows. One should never have forgotten that the tempered system was only a truce that should not longer last than the imperfection of our instruments makes it necessary. The progress of the expected progress in musical instrument making has now been achieved through digitalization. Using microtonal keyboards, it is possible to produce the difference between different whole tone sizes precisely and accurately, as in the Baroque era, but now also starting from each of the microtone keys too. According to the theoretical determination of the degree of consonance by Ulf-Diether and Martin Vogel, and according to the impression when listening to simultaneous pitches intervals derived from relations of the prime number 7, can even sound more consonant than the same, closely neighboring, traditional chromatic 12 Edo intervals derived from the multiplication and proportion of the prime numbers 1 to 5, the partial tones 1 to 6. Ecmelian whole tones such as 7 to 8 and thirds such as 5 to 7 and 7 to 9, etc. also occur traditional musical cultures. Ulf-Diether suggested a completely new and well thought out structure in this context. The natural 7, 4 to 7 for example, which is more consonant than the many traditional intervals, could be incorporated into the European tone system under certain conditions.
Excuse me, don't you have, isn't there a mistake in the previous slide? You are mentioning ecmelic thirds as 5 to 7. Shouldn't it be 6 to 7? Because 5 to 7 is
6 to 7, yeah.
septimal triton.
Yeah. Various new tone systems are now in use, for example in jazz. Alternative calculations of the tonal path may be relevant from them. Since there can now be several micro-intervallically slightly modified pitch variants for every once chromatically identical 12 Edo interval, and for every 12 Edo chord structure, there can also be micro-intervallically differentiated tonal paths for them. Tonal paths are now just sequences of intervals, but also chords and tonalities. The purpose of this discussion of tonal paths is illustrated below, using the chord structures shown. These also represent a possible microtonal sequence in time, possible melodic and harmonic sequences steps from one microtone or microinterval to the next. The meaning of the technical term tonal path as such is thus modified in a differentiating way. There are now several differentiated microtonal paths to very similar chromatically identical tones, microintervallical not identical. Relationship between the 72 microchromatic sizes and microtonal chords. The following tables can be used to find all possible interval sizes within the 72-step tone system and relate them to a chord, poly or tonality. No, tonality.
Sorry, Dieter, are you meant to move on? No.
Maybe I move, but it
Okay.
will come then.
Yeah.
Starting from the bass note, each accompanying chord can facilitate the location of the intended upper interval tone by using as few consonant intermediate tone relations as possible. The assumption that singers can think of these interval sizes internally by remembering and imagining them, and with some practice, e.g. using the audio examples or in overtone singing, can make them sound in a specific way, has been proven by Ulf-Diether Soyka and others. There are intervals that only acquire a specific quality when sounded simultaneously, whereas they are almost impossible to hit successively, because they are practically indistinguishable in character from the surrounding interval sizes. An example of this is the 6/13-8, which with around 841 cents, which can be intoned accurately even in the context of polyphonic chords. In accordance with Sonant's theories described above, the table also includes partial tone frequency ratios in just intonation based on the prime numbers 1 to 13, limit 13, normally limit 11, and the multiples. Just intonation based on prime frequency ratios is systematically accompanied by microchromatic comma shifts. 1 comma pitch difference by a 5:1 frequency ratio, 2 comma by 7:1 ratios, quarter tone shifts by 11:1 ratios, and in rare cases the 13th partial was also used to form chords, which can also be imagined and intoned purely in harmony. The interval sizes, chords, and their degrees of consonance in the following music examples can be verified by listening to the audio samples. These can sound almost pure, with no beats. Here you see the notation system. I found it by Ulf-Diether Soyka and made simple supplements by tone names under the notes. And now examples of such interval and chord. The following chord tables are arranged so that the micro-interval between bass and soprano in each column on the right is 1 comma larger than the next, than before on the left. And so that in the two staves with middle voices there is a chord in which the bass tone and the top tone occur. The chord letters correspond to jazz notation, but they refer no frequency ratios in just intonations. They refer to frequency in just intonation. This is the right, yes. The chords are numbered according to the number of commata between the lower and the upper voice, according to the microchromatic interval size 32 Edo. 0 distance is identical to 72 distance, therefore. In the two chords 0 and 1, the tone of the upper voice is a different pitch, quasi-syntonic comma. To see, that's possible. 80 to 81. The higher, more distant from the ground frequency, the partial tone to which Schönberg referred, the closer in cent intervals are they to each other, e.g. within one and the same traditional chromatic semitone. Chord 0 is identical to chord 72, since in 72 Edo there is an octave interval between the fundamental and the highest tone, C to C. The C major triad is sufficient to accompany the pure octave. The chord letter C is written below without a number symbol. Next. In chord, oh, I go back. In chord 1, the root note is also C, but the top tone is YC. I call it YC, 1 comma higher. The YC, 1 comma higher in chord 1 would be dissonant in the context of a C major triad, or would traditionally be classified as impure. In chord 1, pure fifths are initially layered above the bass note C until the Pythagorean E appears. Above this, the YC sound as a harmonically pure minor sixth with a pure A minor triad, which is layered over C9 chord. The chord is therefore bitonal. Both partial chords are pure in themselves, and the interval between them is also pure, just intonation of all intervals involved, ideally without any beats. Now I try to have the sound. This is 0. Now chord 1. Oh, where is it? Let me start. It's not pure. Next example, please start. The next interval sizes and the corresponding chords are notated using the same method. Here, for example, are chords 2 to 6, where increasingly larger microintervals gradually reach the semitone intervals between C and C sharp. Let us try. Chord 2. Pardon. You see the chord structure below. Chord 3. This is a phenomenon which Franz Richter Herf told us. Chords with more tones are often more harmonical, more consonant than the interval itself. Chord 5. This is a well-known chord of Alban Berg. In 6. Now I could describe each chord, but I think it's clear so also when I get the next things. What is this? Yeah, here, now. Chords 23 and 24. The major 6 does not exist in just intonation as a single pitch or interval, but can be differentiated bisonantly into at least 2 interval sizes. In the Middle Ages, the third was also considered as a dissonant. Chord 23 and 24. The tonal path C, G to X, E, X is my name for the lower E, from the major tone series 1, 3, 5 relation, pure third tuning of the Renaissance chord, thus achieves a different third pitch in micro intervals than the tonal path C, G, D, A, E of the older Pythagorean tuning, the fifth tuning in chord 24. All of us know this. Now the next. Pythagorean. Little difference. This is so small. Chord 46 shows the distance between C and W, G sharp, which could be reached by C, X, E and W, C sharp, in which pure thirds can be layered on top of each other in just intonation without beats. It would differ from a tonal path to the microintervallically higher X, G sharp in chord 747. For these pure fifths, which, let us hear, it's easier to hear. In chord 47 we have, according to Rohr, a quasi-trisonant tonal path to X A flat absolutely necessary to take these chords this way. There could be another tonal path with thirds over and not so. Now I have some more examples. Let us look if you are interested in specials. Some of them. Chord 17 is the first chord where I truly required a trisonant tonal path. This was, next one, here. And here in chord 57 commata distance between bass and soprano, I got the most complicated single example, which is trisonant and also contains the 13th partial tone. This example is easier to read when transposed microintervallically. On the left side, I started with the tone C, and here I started with the lower XC. For reading, I think it's easier to understand, but the sound starts with C. Next one. If you transpose the entire table of all chords up by 1 comma microchromatically, the result is a new chord table above the microintervallically next higher bass tone. I call it YC, which is otherwise identical in interval sizes to the table above the bass tone C. You see here the comma, and all chords are the same but only higher. So I come near to Alles Haber.
Okay, so let's start. Welcome, Stefan, to our symposium. You're talking about your chamber cantata. Stefan studied composition and music theory in Salzburg, Basel, Lyon, Karlsruhe, and Adana. After beginnings at Society of Frank Schreker in Paris, he started to explore the Islamic world and Sufism, becoming proficient in Arabic, Turkish, and Farsi, and emerging as an expert of Makam. In 2007, he moved to Istanbul to obtain a PhD on a tuning system invented by the Kanun virtuosi. Now you have to explain how I pronounce it. Okay, Julia, you said it. A collaboration that found its way into international literature. He taught composition at the Ankara State Conservatory and at the Istanbul Technical University. Influenced by postmodern anthropology and contact with various schools of thought, Pohlit's work flows from an inherently transcultural concept of music. His pioneering investigation in extended tonal systems, drawing on the arithmetic tradition of Asia Minor, Asia Minor, has been presented at various international conferences. Lots of compositions is done. I just make it a bit shorter.
Mhm.
A double concerto for canoon and cello is on its way. And please welcome Stefan Pohlit.
Yeah, thank you very much. Everybody can hear me. I mean, I haven't slept very much, so it's. I hope, I can keep the concentration. I think this my topic actually is it's a continuation of Dieter's lecture. Actually, it is a continuation of something that I find very ecumenic in the sense of the ecumenic society. It's been like 22 years, I think, since I wrote a diploma thesis in music theory at Karlsruhe Music University, and there in the library of Karlsruhe Music University I discovered some of these volumes from proceedings from Salzburg, and some of them actually there was one of 1986. It also contained these writings by Rudolf Haase and Rolf Mädel, and for me they were quite seminal actually. They were very important for understanding of the problematic. Also Martin Vogel, of course, no? And the question whether what we call tonality could be continued by including new prime limits. No? I mean, which for me was something very logical, because as a music theory student, I understood that tonality is not just something that fell from the sky. It evolved during the centuries, and why should it continue to evolve? No? I got immersed quite a lot with in this topic, and this piece here, this is just one of it's just an example from what I do at the moment. It is actually a piece where this has happened, where I think this has succeeded. Something like a really extended tonality has been achieved. In the sense, in the spirit of the Ecumenic Music Society, although I have, through the years, I have been converted rather to become like a Mark Sabbatian in my notation, because I use the Helmholtz-Ellis notation. So this piece here, the idea to it started around 2017-18, when my wife and I lived in Urla, in the Izmir province of Turkey, under quite difficult circumstances. But during that time, I befriended an archaeologist, a very famous archaeologist. Actually, he's the discoverer of the famous olive oil manufacture of ΚΛΑΖΟΜΕΝΑΙ, which happened, the excavation started in 1979, and this Güven Bakır, he advised me on finding written sources from the time, so from let's say written ancient Greek sources on the place, on ΚΛΑΖΟΜΕΝΑΙ, where we were living at the time, and from these sources, from this bibliography, I selected a number of fragments, and I combined them to a new form of mythology. Actually, by referring rather to Claude Lévi-Strauss and other structuralists. So I created this sort of new mythology that has to do with the topics that I explore in the music too. And the piece ΚΛΑΖΟΜΕΝΑΙ is it is based on polarities that are happening in the music itself, and referring to its subject, to the story that it tells. It plays out, how to say it, it's like a mise en scène of something that is related to the arithmetic musical tradition of Asia Minor, but it is I show it, I explore it as a form of geography, and so we have these two regional communes, these two cities that were located very close by, Erythraia and ΚΛΑΖΟΜΕΝΑΙ, and they both historically they are known for different spiritual traditions. One is the Sibyllian cult of prophetesses that lived in a cave near Erythraia. And so we're channeling, let's say, like dark entities, dark wisdom, and the other is the famous natural philosophers from Asia Minor. One of them, Anaxagoras, who is famous for it's like the father of materialism, let's say, because he claimed that the sun was not a god, but just a burning piece of metal. So there are inner and outer qualities that I explore, and into this historic settings then comes around the 4th century BC the Persian Empire that invades the region. And the Persians come with their own cult, with the sun cult, of course, because they are Zoroastrian. So we have these three influences, like as a background, historic background, something that inspired the structure of the music, let's say.
Why was
Anaxagoras
banished?
He was banished by the Athenians. Yeah, from I think he died actually close to ΚΛΑΖΟΜΕΝΑΙ, but I think that's not very clear. But he was banished by the Athenians, and he committed suicide. So that shows that this kind of materialism, this modern materialistic science wasn't that popular at the time. But these text fragments, we don't have the time to explore everything, but there's a very good recording on the internet, and I will be happy to share the score with you if you're interested. I've already talked about this background, but of course I have to emphasize that I didn't attempt to recreate real ancient Greek music, because this is impossible. Because we don't know how it really sounded. There are very few examples where this might be close to the reality. On the other hand, it's a polyphonic piece, of course. So it's a kind of a reimagination. It's a utopia of something that relates to this tradition, but it is coming from my own musical spirit, let's say. I will, in this lecture now, I will talk about some these core issues of how this expanded microtonal tonality plays out in the score. So how it unfolds. The first problem is that theory and practice in the Middle East never work together. Actually, there's always there are certain theories, and then in practice they are very used very differently. I refer to Middle Eastern form principles because after having lived in the Middle East for 11 years alone in Turkey, actually, I came to experience the living Makam tradition as something as the air, like the air of Greek music. I mean, like the closest living tradition we have from the Greek tradition. But in this monophonic macabre music, we do not have to care about what these intervals really mean when we intonate them, because in modal we just have melodies. In polyphonic music this is different, and if we have different prime limits, that different, let's say different vectors that have to coexist, then there will be some places when when vertical and horizontal just do not work together, and so there will be moments when we have to lie about this truth, when very simple temperaments will be necessary, or maybe not necessary, but we will use them in order to create order, because otherwise it will become too chaotic. So when this belief in complete just intonation truth, this building just crashes. So dealing with extended harmony will always be close to a realm of, let's say, almost magic, because I can erase very small amounts of interval sizes that nobody will hear, and I can create a completely different experience of the intervals. And I use just intonation mostly because for the musicians it is very easy to understand what's happening, especially for strings, but also, I mean, we've talked already about brass instruments for whom it's actually even easier. Maybe just as a short introduction into this into this notation, is there anybody not familiar with the Helmholtz-Ellis notation? Actually, everybody knows it, yeah.
Can you make it a bit?
No, unfortunately not. But the idea is basically that, I mean, of course, there are very deep connections also to what I studied from ancient traditions. For example, that the octaves are perceived as the mother, and then there are the so-called sons, which are the different prime, the different spines, the 3, the 5, 7, and so on. But I use this piece is an 11 limit piece, no? And there are different. There's a different accidental for every prime vector. So the octaves, of course, they don't use any. I mean, they don't need anything. The Pythagorean intervals are the 5th, so they are just the traditional intervals, but they are tuned purely. Then the Ptolemaic accidentals are with an arrow, which is the syntonic comma. I mean, if you think in temperament, this would be roughly 15 cents or something, but it is rather the syntonic comma of 22 cents. And then the septimal accidental refers mostly to the harmonic minor 7th, of course. I use it in 2 directions, also as the lower, the eutonal 7th, which actually amounts into an interval that sounds more tense, actually, although it goes down. Already shows that these additional dimensions, they work differently. If you really take them seriously. And then, of course, 11, we have the Arab 3/4 tone. But really, I have explored, I have worked on these dimensions so much. I mean, like for 25 years already. I have tried to understand what they mean in a spiritual sense. You can say already, yeah. And also, I have followed them really as spatial dimensions. It is not just enriching something that still remains like 5 limit. The idea is really to go into a multi-dimensional space. And maybe we should listen first. I mean, U and O, I mean, I think everybody understands what O tonal means and U tonal. No? Basically, I mean, I use the example from Riemann actually, so that the U tonal dominant seventh chord is this kind of this half diminished minor chord. No? So a subdominant chord. No? The smallest interval of my system is not very small actually. It is not smaller than a semitone. It's actually bigger. No? It's a larger semitone, 15 divided by 16. No? In this piece, yeah, I'm not very interested in smallest steps actually, in my opinion. I mean, for me that is not important. Because I translate all these relationships into harmonic functions. I rather distinguish between other similar semitones. So it is basically what we call the apotomy. Pythagorean, we would have here the apotome here, and so the bigger semitone as the major semitone and the minor semitone, the lemma. No? One is 90 cent, the other is 114 cent. But my apotome intervals here are 15 divided by 16, it's 112 cents, and the other would be slightly bigger. It's a septimal interval, 14 divided by 15. No? And they have different meanings harmonically. No? I mean, they mean different cadences in the end. Maybe let's first listen to something, to the prologue, which is in Latin and monophonic. It's the only text fragment in Latin that I used. That's why it has a different setting. It's Plinius the Elder telling about a Clazomenian whose soul was wandering while he was sleeping, and his enemies later they burned his body while he was wandering with his soul, so he couldn't come back. It's kind of a tragicomic story. Maybe just first listen to it and then we can talk about it has a kind of a folkloristic tone, and they are in this very, as simple as it sounds actually, in the melody itself, there are tonal relations that already relate to the harmonic geography in the harmonic part that comes later. So that ΚΛΑΖΟΜΕΝΑΙ has a certain place, actually, harmonic place also. The harp, which is notated with only one stave here, has certain detuned strings in just intonation. Others are not detuned because you can't detune the whole harp now, of course. Yeah, you want to keep it practical, so that the harp sometimes, I mean, there are like 2 or 4 cents sometimes difference from the rest of those songs, which I thought are practically feasible now, which didn't cause any problems. Let's just start now with this beginning. It is maybe just to get back to this picture here. I mean, yeah, no, maybe we don't need that. No? I mean, I would like to play for you a little longer part, 5 minutes maybe, where we it's like an introduction into the geography of the place. So we have Erythraia and ΚΛΑΖΟΜΕΝΑΙ, and from there, yeah, the place is being explored, but it's quite clear actually what happens, because the music has these different regions that are related to what the text is telling. Right? Yeah. So that's the C, of course. No? I mean, that's the Q of ΚΛΑΖΟΜΕNΑΙ. to show in a different example, just to spare time. These lines here, this is actually the bridge to the next, to the refrain section, to the first refrain section, Whalley 1. They are actually built as prolational canons. So there's this kind of mirror idea is also unfolding in a way that there's an undertone series like a Schlesinger scale concept in the upper instrument, and then there's an instrument that is mirroring it, but in a different velocity. It is normally slower. What is important about these canons is that they work contrapuntically. I mean, there's a resolution actually at certain points where the resolution becomes really consonant. I mean, so that it's a real counterpoint. That it's not just a concept. This was important for me. Just show this. I'm sorry, it's just my eyes. I think it goes back to the first slide. Sorry. Yes, that's where we were. Exactly. So just a few sentences about the form. It's actually an Ottoman Peshref form, which is a cyclic structure. It has 3 main sections and 3 refrain sections, and you could understand it then in the way that we have recitatives and arias. And there are these different text fragments from ancient Greece that form a story in a way, but they go more and more into something that you could understand as mythology. I mean, where historiography and mythology meet in a way. I mean, everybody who has read Herodotus, for example, knows this, that there are many, he tells many fables actually, that are probably not actually historic. But Herodotus, in the end, he tells a story about the Persian king and the Persian emperor meeting with the elders of the invaded Ionia and Lydia, and there's a story that again relates to the music, because it's about a flute player who looks into the water, and who sees the mirror of the water. I will come back to that later. There are just, Dieter has already talked about these different ways, the different directions of extended harmony. I mean, I don't want to bore you with all these details, but they might be known to you anyway. It's just I wanted to point out that in 7-limit harmony, just as an example, in 11 it's even more complex, but there are certain intervals that become more important than they were known before. There's a certain tritone, 7 divided by 5. Like this harmonic tritone that becomes quite important, and there's a 3/4 tone that is based on an extended relation between 7 and 5 that we haven't known before. But it sounds very similar to 12 divided by 11, but it is not, because harmonically it leads to somewhere else. And so here we have details that are without the harmonic background, they wouldn't mean nothing actually. They wouldn't be audible in a way. So they only, but I mean, with this harmonic background, sometimes I would even say, well, the question is it necessary to make them microtonal? Could you, with understanding this background in certain instrumental contexts, I have managed to compose, let's say, microtonal music without microtones, because this background remains. And then they were not so recht gehört, but rather they were just corrected because the accordion has nothing else than 12 tones, for example. So the context is very important. I want to show how this context. Oh, it makes. Oh yeah, that's nice. But I didn't know that I managed. I will get back to that, and then it plays. Hello. Yeah, it will play it from. It will play it actually. Yeah, it's great. There are passages when I had to lie, to have to use this magic because the intervals should be notated differently, but they are passing. They are at the same time. They have a harmonic identity, and they are also passing notes melodically. And then I had to decide, and so the harmonic. I will show it's just a detail in the clarinet. It's not a very important detail, but it shows how the passage actually works. But it works. It has different. You could explain it in different ways. So it's like this. The Baron Münchhausen who pulls himself out of the muddle just by his own braid. So a structure that is actually in a kind of it's role playing. It's not really standing, but it still works. I will tell you when the score example starts. Is that visible? So now. So yeah, I will play it again. Yeah, it's so fast. So now. So now here we are. So yes, here. In order to show the problem again, we have another example. It's resolution. The question resolution in 7 limit. Yeah, that's a very ugly sample. I'm playing now the original. So this is being resolved, and then harmonically to the median. Then here, this is Eric Flyer. Harmonically it's so now we move to ΚΛΑΖΟΜΕΝΑΙ from there. Yes, and now can I? No, yeah. I have to stop this. I want to show something else about that. Because I have also, I mean, U-tonal, and it moves actually from U-tonal to O-tonal harmony. No? And if you have questions, I would maybe make this the last example, and then we can just move.
Thank you.
Because I will try to get back. I think I have to start with. Yeah, no, I play just the example. So you see, the first chord was actually a U-tonal, a U-tonal chord. Exactly, it's and then move into a O-tonal. Of course, the harmonic relations are quite simple. No? I mean, they are like from A, there's a chord based on the harmonic seventh of A with this lower G, and then we have F here, no? Which is but the harmonic F related to I mean, which is a just harmonic major third, no? to A. Yeah. So the piece is built in this way. It's like I think it has a duration of 25 minutes approximately, and it has illustrative dimensions too in the later parts especially. And you are invited to I mean, there's a very good recording from Klangforum Heidelberg on the internet. Thank you.
Presentation, very interesting, and like the music very much, and your ideas behind it. So I'm sure there are questions. Yeah.
I find it great how easy you can change between different musical styles and musical languages. It's so easy. On the beginning I heard not only heterophonia, also psalmodia, maybe from Alexandria, I don't know from where, but microtonal, not European, and I think it originally in the Antique it was maybe microtonal and not as we think now. And later it sounds really 12-tonal music, but it's very much more aware that it is that the degree of consonance and dissonance is more calculated by the composer, not by the interpret. Mm-hmm. This is so interesting for me.
Mm-hmm. Any more statements, questions? Yes.
I just wanted to ask, because you said that it's not that difficult for the ensemble to play in tune, and because I've always, I mean, in my mind, I guess that just intonation has always seemed like quite a difficult thing to ask people to do. So, how did can you say a little bit about that process, please?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the composer has to understand these degrees of consonance and dissonance. In 2006, I think in Darmstadt, I met a neurophysicist, Gerald Langner from Darmstadt University, and he's actually the guy. It's a bit like this archaeologist. He made a discovery, a very important discovery, how consonants and dissonants are being perceived in the brain. And it's very simple. It's like that, like pulsations. And more simpler pulsations are being perceived are more consonant, and more complicated pulsations are more dissonant. And of course, with these simple examples, this is boring, no? But it is the basis of how we understand consonance and dissonance, the harmonicity in the end. No? And I have built up on this concept, no? On this understanding. For strings, I mean, it is always, I mean, the basis is always, I mean, the 0 point, the point of origin is always this A chamber pitch, no? And from there everything goes out, no? And it is, yeah, for the strings it is important to have a certain reference to their, yeah, to the open strings or to the resonance. No? Of course, it is difficult for the woodwinds, but the woodwinds actually in the rehearsals they often played just with a tuning device, no? To know how they intonate. For the horn, it is very simple, no? Because you just tune the valves correctly and justly, and then they shouldn't be corrected. No? And yeah. And for the singer, this is amazing. I mean, the singer is fantastic. Yes. Also the pronunciation. I mean, we talked about that before. We wanted this Koine pronunciation from the 1st century, from the time of Pliny the Elder. So it sounds almost like modern Greek already, which I know, so it was easier. It has something lively. No? We wanted something that it sounds as if somebody's telling the story now.
So the players don't actually really need to understand just intonation, or do they?
Yeah, but it's just intonation is so natural because we hear just the, I mean, yeah, what else do we hear? No?
Yeah, I know, but I mean, to know the theory is maybe a bit more complex, but...
Yeah, it's not more complex. I mean, the piano is more irrational. It's just when you have, I mean, but there's a lot of help. For example, from the harp, from certain. There's a slight scordatura in the viola, and unfortunately, in every song, there's always this viola player who is complaining about everything, and it was very bad too. But there are certain there are many ways to assist the musicians that it works. Although, of course, with this ensemble, I mean, there was a lot of attention. I mean, there were two conductors working with the musicians for like 4 or 5 days, just on this piece.
I suppose I'm thinking about British standards of rehearsal time, whereas if you've got...
Yeah, I know, then everything is just in half an hour. And,
Yes. So, firstly, I think your music is like ravishing and really good.
Oh, thank you.
Excellent music. And very sophisticated JI language that seems like the music you were just showing us with this Ectos passage.
Yes.
Is very developed and subtle JI harmony music. How much, in a very general sense, did ancient Greek sources of harmonic theory influence you, or did they not? Or was the music you were, the tones you were pitching, the pitches you were choosing, were they purely like, I want it to sound this particular way, or was there some sense that you were like, I'm going to go and look at Arctas, or I'm going to go and look at Ptolemy, or whatever?
No, I studied them really. My relationship to them is quite theoretical, I have to admit. I studied them when I wrote my thesis about Julien Jalal-Device's system, because he read all of this when he created this Kanun system. And Safiuddin, for example, the systematist Arabic, I mean it's rather Persian, but for the Arabs, important for the Arabs at that time, he also referred to, I mean actually he copied all of these Greek systems in his treatise without using them. They are just there, they're just stated, you can use this and 13 to 14 and so on. And then I have a very emotional relationship to these Schlesinger scales because I like them so much, just for an aesthetic, from an aesthetic viewpoint. But I think it's rather like inhaling something and then I think it's much like channeling something. It's more my really, I mean, because I wanted that it musically works, and yeah, a bit more like a shaman who eats the mushroom and then that because there's so much text that I wanted to illustrate in a way. And I had a very good theory professor who was very much into the German Lied tradition, in not only Schubert but Hugo Wolf and up to Pfitzner even. And there's so much subtlety in these leads, in these songs, of text and music relationships. And yeah, you can't do that if you just have a concept in your head, I suppose.
Yeah.
I did not hear only counterpoint. I think there is some of countertonality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are moments when, well, I was always fascinated with bitonality, although this is not, I mean, there are some superposed, like here, there's superposition, for example. There's C, and then this is just easier, but actually maybe a purist would say, well, why don't you notate this as the 7th of C? No? Yeah. For example, no? It's just for the musicians, it's easier to say, well, you just create the harmonic undecimal augmented fourth of it. Yeah.
You played it sometimes more, and I felt that sometimes I listened first floor, sometimes ground floor, sometimes second floor. It's interesting for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, in a few years before, I mean, when I first came here, actually, I think I was so much influenced from, I was almost like an Arab, I think. So I really thought my music was in Pesce for orchestra. You can listen to that on the internet. The music is basically hanging from the melody. Although there's something like a bass, and the bass is perceived as very rhythmically, actually, but it is not in the Generalbass manner of where we actually as Europeans come from. Yeah.
Martin.
I wanted to ask you, but maybe it was already answered, but do you consider yourself like looking from the perspective of Lou Harrison, like who had this strict style, freestyle? So, but I think you partially answered it already, that you're mentioning Schlesinger scales and so on. So, are you more like you build the scale first and you play around in that particular scale for a while and then move on, or you would rather consider yourself in this kind of freestyle where you have some like favorite intervals and you are just freely exploring the harmonic space?
Well, both and none of them, I think, because they are structural. I mean, you want to. I had this interview with Nigel Kennedy actually this week, and he said for him it's very important. I mean, he's like today's like a jazz freak maybe, but for him it's important that a composer has to say something but also that he doesn't, he said he, no? I'm sorry, also she of course, doesn't exhibit his intelligence too egocentrically. No? Yeah. And I think it's important to have a very simple basis, so that a very, well, not strict, but a very clear form comes out of it. No? But I believe in this, I'm fascinated about, when you call it freestyle, I suppose you mean that you don't have a fixed scale, but just by using, by departing from free intervals, from just intonation intervals, you can come up to any dimension possible. Yeah, that's what fascinates me.
That's what Lou Harrison called it, it's not me.
Yeah, and also of course Ben Jones. I mean, I'm very much in that tradition, I suppose.
May I suggest that we continue your question?
Yeah.
In the coffee house. Thank you very much.
I thank you.